Dr. Shashi
Thank you,
Tharoor.
Madam Chairman. Madam Chairman, a few years ago, I was constrained to observe of my absent friend, the Honourable Finance Minister, that her budget speech in this House reminded me of the garage mechanic who said, "I couldn't fix your brakes, so I made the horn louder." Looking at this year's finance bill in her absence, I think she has slightly changed her tune. She's now saying to taxpayers, "I couldn't repair the roof, so I've brought you an umbrella." This finance bill is a classic case of patchwork solutions at a time when the nation needs clarity, conviction and decisive leadership. The government's economic management finds itself in the grasp of deep-rooted structural challenges, Madam Chairman. We've seen growth targets being scaled down. Double-digit growth is apparently unattainable, and the ambitions of maintaining a respectable growth rate of even 6% and above are fading away. The portion of our population engaged in agriculture is higher than ever, while manufacturing has shrunk to around 15% of GDP, the lowest in this century, ma'am. Our informal sectors of employment are soaring, and dependence on foreign capital inflows to manage the current account deficit is growing amidst a staggering situation where our exports are stagnating, production is not going up. Even those who are earning 5 or 6 times the per capita income are now struggling to maintain their standard of living. So Viksit Bharat by 2047 is a laudable objective for a quarter century from now. But how does this finance bill begin to get us there? It has taken the government years to finally realize that just 2% of Indians, the hard-working taxpayers, ma'am, have been really carrying this country on their backs. Individual taxpayers, mainly the salaried middle class, were already contributing more than the corporations last year, and yet no action was taken. That would have been the time to act, as I pointed out in last year's budget debate. But now, in the current financial year, corporate taxes have crawled up by 8%, while individual and non-corporate taxation has soared by 21%. Now the government finally wakes up and gives something of a tax break to the salaried middle class. Who else is financing the government? The Aam Aadmi, through indirect taxes, most notoriously GST. Instead of the good and simple tax we all wanted, India has multiple and confusing GST rates, including the highest GST rate in the world at 28%. But tax revenue still lags at 18% of GDP. In contrast, China has 13% GST cap, but they collect 20% of GDP with it. Vietnam has an even lower 8% cap and collects 19% of GDP. Thailand, GST is only 7%, ma'am, and they get net 17% of GDP. Now, beyond exorbitant rates, our system carries a dubious tax, the dubious burden of being the most complex tax in the world. 77 countries have GST, and they impose only 1 or 2 tax slabs. This multi-rate structure in our country has only further raised the compliance burden for businesses. Indeed, bifurcating input tax claims based on different product tax rates is a significant hurdle for businesses. There's supposed to be an advanced ruling mechanism that should help, but I can tell you from the MSE food sector in Kerala, the MSMEs there, that applications are left unheard for months, even years. And our traditional snacks in Kerala, like parampuri, vada, ada, korkata, all face an unfair 18% tax simply because of the absence of an assignable HSN code. With a shelf life of under 24 hours, these snacks often go unsold and are discarded. But sadly, their input tax claims are denied, leading to mounting losses. This system, I'm sorry to say, is less a tax and more a punishment. So much for the claims of ease of doing business. And where does all this money, all this tax, direct and indirect, end up? Mostly lost, apparently, because 28.59 lakh crores, both disputed and undisputed, in unrealized tax revenue has been sitting untouched in this finance bill, nearly double the amount from fiscal year 21. Imagine if this was actually realized, our entire fiscal deficit for fiscal year 25 could be vanishing overnight. But no, instead, 13.97 lakh crores in corporate tax remains unrealized. Only 9.11 lakhs has been collected. Similarly, non-corporate tax demand stands at 14.62 lakh crore. Collections lag at 10.45. And GST evasion has doubled to 2 lakh crores already this year, with 18,000 fake entities caught many more remain undetected. Now, while all this is going on, between 2017 and 2022, 35,000 wealthy Indians, the so-called high net worth individuals, left our country to relocate abroad, complaining of tax terrorism. Obviously, when rich people migrate, their wealth also migrates with them. And this affects revenue generation, wealth creation, employment opportunities. Surely we need to review not just their effective tax rates, but the manner in which tax demands are made that drive such people away. Unleashing tax terrorism is self-destructive, madam. It reduces sources of long-term revenue from future wealth creation. The government's attempt to raise money through other means, all failure. Through disinvestment, underwhelming results. They've abandoned the strategy. Reports suggest that the PLI scheme, introduced with such fanfare, will also be allowed to lapse because it hasn't worked. Such is the state of affairs that the government now relies on the Reserve Bank of India's dividend as a major source of revenue. That's neither sustainable nor ideal. And this bill prompts another question, Madam Chairman. If the government is set to forego almost 1 lakh crores in direct tax revenue and 2,600 crore in indirect taxes, on top of the inevitable drop in import tariffs due to likely reductions in customs revenue prompted by our responses to the American government policies, and on top of that declining capital gains tax amid a stock market downturn, then revenue receipts are going to be further squeezed across all these categories. How can the government claim it will cut the fiscal deficit to 4.4% for the coming financial year? The maths don't add up. Is our finance minister, welcome Madam Finance Minister, are you offering us Jadugar economics? How can we reduce the fiscal deficit in these circumstances? And if we do, who pays the price? And let me ask, ma'am, very frankly, why is it that only 2% Indians are paying income tax? The reasons are endless. Unemployment, income inequality, poverty, inflation. But can the government continue to run itself on the backs of just 2% of our people? While the economy is crawling forward at a snail's pace, income distribution is as lopsided as ever. The top 1%, their share more than doubled, from 10% in 1991 to 23% in 2023. And then the top 10%, so the top 1% went to 23%, the top 10% went from 35% to 59%. And the bottom 50% of our population, their share of our national income has shrunk from 20% to 13%. Clearly, prosperity and growth aren't slow for everyone, just for those of the bottom half of our population. But they're the ones who need progress the most. Madam Chairman, it's becoming almost painfully repetitive. Every time we talk about unemployment, we're faced with the same grim statistics. Reports predict we need to generate 10 million jobs annually from 2024 to 2030 to keep up with the growth targets. Yet the skill mismatch is glaring. Only half the graduates of our country possess the skills required by industry, leaving a significant gap in their employability. And skill development, sadly, has been a failure. Just look at their placement figures. Now, while unemployment is a concern, the assessment of poverty is troubling for a different reason. The NFHS 5 data reveal that 14.96%, 15% of India's population is multidimensionally poor. Now, shockingly, the government went 11 years without any consumption survey, any expenditure survey, leaving a significant void in assessing poverty levels until it was finally conducted in 2024. But here's the real issue. Our calculation is still based on the 2011 census, especially the sampling frame. An outdated data set, completely unfit for assessing the present socio-economic reality, is what leads the government to say they've defeated poverty. Well, according to the World Bank, the international extreme poverty line is $2.15 per person, and that's daily, and they use a higher poverty line of $365 for the lower middle-income countries, but India's median poverty line is only 1/10 of that World Bank figure at the present exchange rate, which would make us wonder if we truly understand the scale of poverty around us. It's high time we acknowledge that the true extent of our poverty is very grave, and we must have more accurate assessments to ensure that our efforts at poverty alleviation really work and have a lasting impact on the millions who continue to struggle in silence. The hopes of economic growth and prosperity, Madam Chairman, seem to be slipping further away as unemployment rises, poverty deepens, jobs are scarce, wages are stagnant, and just when struggling households think they might catch a break, instead of easing the burden, small businesses find themselves drowning in compliance rules. Informal workers are still making up a chunk of the workforce, and they're pushed further to the margins. So since the Finance Minister has been kind enough to join us, let me capture the present situation in some light verse. Tax our petrol, tax our shirt, tax our footwear, tax our dirt. Tax our mobile, tax our calls, tax our hovels, crumbling walls. Tax our salary, tax our ride, tax our mithai on the side. Tax our sorrow, tax our cheer, tax our future year by year. GST income tax forms pile high, cesses, surcharges make us sigh. Roads with potholes, trains that derail. Where does it go? Is it all a fail? When we ask, is this all in vain? You smile and say, it's for the nation's gain. And if we ask you to try and fix it, you point and say, you will be Vixit. Yet still we pay with a patriotic heart, hoping our cash will play a small part in building a future bright and fair for the nation we love beyond compare. And let me say, ma'am, that the 5 southern states, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Karnataka and Telangana, are amongst India's strongest economic engines. They are paying taxes. They generate over a quarter of the country's direct taxes. They contribute 28.5% of GST. But when it comes to receiving their fair share, they get a mere 15% of the centre's tax pool. How is this acceptable? How can states that fuel the nation's economy be expected to sustain their growth with such an inadequate return? By all means, let us ask the richer states to help the poorer ones, but surely not in such a disproportionate manner. The Finance Bill 2025 is yet another move by the centre to hoard revenue here at the state's expense. By slashing basic customs duty on several items that are shared with the states and shifting the difference to agricultural infrastructure and development cess, AIDC, which the centre keeps entirely, this ensures that states lose out. So AIDC share is increased, centre deprives the states of extra rightful revenue. Its growing addiction to cesses is not only opaque, but also undermines fiscal federalism. And yet, for all its love of cesses, there's one the centre just can't seem to stomach: the GST compensation cess, which was intended to offset the loss of revenue to states after the GST implementation and has been extended only till March 2026. That money actually belongs to the states. States have repeatedly demanded that their share in vertical devolution be raised from 41% of revenues to 50%, a reasonable demand, but one that continues to be ignored. And what happens when states have grievances? Nothing. Once the Central Finance Commission submits its report, it dissolves, leaving states with no constitutional mechanism to challenge or negotiate their share. Where is the accountability? We could have had an independent fiscal council to serve as a redressal body, ensuring that states have a say in how their hard-earned revenue is allocated. And I urge the Finance Minister to consider such a method, because shouldn't those who contribute the most to the nation's economy have a voice to receive a fairer share? Or can the cycle of economic injustice just continue unchecked? Let me turn, Madam Chair, to my own state, because Kerala's share of tax out of the divisible pool seems to be on a permanent downward slide, from 3.8% under the 10th Finance Commission, 1980 to 85, to 3% in 2000 to 2005, and now under the 15th Finance Commission, it's down to a mere 1.9%. 18,000 crores lost since the last one. Now, this is for a state which is struggling to meet routine expenditures and is sinking into debt that has now crossed 4 lakh crores. But always the expectation of Kerala seems to be pay more, receive less, and somehow keep thriving. Now, amid this financial crunch, Madam Chairman, when the state government sought 4,500 crores in special assistance to tackle coastal erosion, rehabilitate fisher folk through the Punargehem project, modernize fishing harbours, was given no response. Lakhs of poor fishermen are left struggling under a trifecta of crises: low prices for their catch, depleted fish stocks due to overfishing, the removal of kerosene subsidies by this government for their boat engines, and yet no relief package has been announced. Even Kerala's 1,000 crore rupee request to address human-wildlife conflict was ignored. Part of a larger pattern of neglect evident in the plight of the people who are victims of wildlife attacks, fishermen left adrift, ASHA workers still deemed volunteers despite their critical role, and key projects left unfunded. While the centre has earmarked 25 lakh crore for the states, Kerala receives less than 40,000 crore, a drop in the ocean. The state also failed to secure a 24,000 crore economic package for financial stabilisation and the much-needed aid for the Vilnius port project in the current budget. All we have got, and that too after the intervention of the Honourable Governor, is a loan of 5,900 crores and no grant. Apparently, when it comes to equitable financial support, Madam Chairman, some states are more equal than others. Now, the centre's masterclass in delay tactics continues. Wayanad's landslide victims are still waiting for aid that never seems to arrive, despite the Kerala High Court actually urging the government for immediate action. The state government conducted a post-disaster needs assessment and estimated that 2,220 crores was required for recovery and reconstruction, submitted to the centre on November 13th, 2024. Nothing has come. And this is supposed to be urgent disaster relief. I ask you, Madam Chair, instead of releasing much-needed funds like this, the centre still insists that Kerala must first exhaust its own balance in the State Disaster Response Fund for all other disasters before receiving any help for Wayanad. All this while thousands of lives and livelihoods are at stake. But it's part of a larger pattern of neglect and unfulfilled promises. From healthcare and infrastructure to livelihood support, Kerala has been systematically sidelined. I've been pleading in this House many times for help in addressing the severe coastal erosion problem. My own constituency has lost 64 square kilometres of territory to the sea while I have been MP. Bharat Mata ki dharti, lost forever. But the centre says it's not their problem, and the state says they have no money for the sea walls and groins needed to save our coasts. Beaches where youth played football or cricket in my first years as an MP have disappeared today, man. Who is going to help us? And key projects that could transform Kerala's infrastructure and economy continue to be stuck in limbo. The All India Institute of Medical Sciences remains a mirage despite many years of repeated requests. 22 aims have been sanctioned across India. Keralites are still waiting. Similarly, the National Institute of Speech and Hearing in Thiruvananthapuram was promised an upgrade to a national university for rehabilitation and disability studies in the union budget of 2015-16. Explicit commitment, 10 years later, no action. A promise to establish a national university for Ayurveda in Thiruvananthapuram has recently materialized in Gujarat. It seems that where Kerala is concerned, promises are easier to make than to keep. Now, while these delays and denials are Kerala's burden, other aspects for other states, for all our country, the Indian economic landscape is very worrying. The economic survey suggests that foreign investment is moving 2 minutes, ma'am. But in fact, net FDI has been slowing year after year, and outflows are surging. In just April to October last year, a whopping $34.1 billion left the country through disinvestment and repatriation, which is an increase from $26 billion the previous year. India's share of global FDI, even excluding China, is shrinking. But sure, let's keep celebrating token investment announcements while the real money quietly walks out of the door. And it's not just foreign investment that's pulling back. Indian private investment has also been shrinking from 25% of GDP in Dr. Manmohan Singh's time, 2008, to just 13-14% of GDP since 2020. What's the culprit? Weak domestic demand that has dampened confidence and kept businesses from putting their money back into the economy. And we still expect to believe that everything is nice on track for Viksit Bharat. Where are the decisive measures to drive export-led growth, to seize the China +1 opportunity, to revive investments in manufacturing? Does India not wish to absorb the capital leaving China? What are we doing about it? We are abandoning PLI, and this bill offers nothing new to inspire economic confidence. Ma'am, just finished. The service sector alone cannot drive broad-based growth. Industrial expansion is essential to create jobs and build economic resilience, and we must say that there is no large national strategy in this bill to achieve that. To conclude, Madam Chair, we are left with a finance bill devoid of vision and lacking in resolve. The people of India deserve decisive action and forward-thinking policies, yet their aspirations have been set aside If Viksit Bharat is to come, it will be built by those who are currently unemployed, who have no money to spend, few opportunities to improve their lives. I urge the Finance Minister and the government to think about them. India requires and deserves a strategy that addresses their deepest needs and aspirations. And sadly, we're yet to see one in this bill. Thank you, Madam Chairman, and Jai Hind.